Hey, my name's Jonathan Clark, also known as DJ Bolivia, and thanks for tuning in for another video tutorial project. This is probably one of the most ambitious projects that I've ever attempted, and it's kind of something that I've wanted to do for quite a few years. And in this set of tutorials, this little mini-series, I'm going to try to teach you how to produce an entire track. Like I say, this is a very, very ambitious project. And realistically, I've wanted to do a series of tutorials about producing dance music for years and years. And what I want to do, the scope of it, to do it properly, is going to take a couple hundred videos. So this mini-series is not about that long-term project that I've been wanting to do for a long time. This is more of a focused project. Instead of looking at all the different bricks that are required to build a project together, all the small parts and stuff like that, I'm going to try and do a major oversight of an existing project. And I know this is going to be a little bit more complex than most people understand about music production, but if you're starting to get into music production, I think this is going to be really, really valuable, even though it's not the smaller steps, gradual sequence that you would normally go through as you're learning. Now, one thing that I found when I was learning to produce music is that I found tons and tons of resources. I found all kinds of books about dance music production. I went to school at Berklee's College of Music out of Boston. There's thousands and thousands of YouTube tutorials. There's all kinds of ways that you can learn about dance music production. But there's not, one thing I never really found was an all-in-one package that took a full project and kind of put all the pieces together. You know, it was easy to find 150 tutorials about how to make a kick drum, but there wasn't a whole lot out there about the whole project. And so this is what I wanted to give to you. And so basically what I've done is I've talked to one of my good friends, Fran Cormier, about this project. And he's another producer from the east coast of Canada, Atlantic Canada, and he's very professional. He's gone to school at Dubspot. He's done all kinds of music production and whatnot. So we decided to do this project together, and instead of just show you stuff on a screen, we're actually going to put the entire project files from this song, full thing, online for you to download for free. Which means not only can you play with it and try and get a better understanding of how it all fits together, all the different parts, it also means it's going to be really easy for you to do remixes, if you want, of this particular track that we're going to show you. Because you can take what we've already gotten, and instead of building something new from scratch, you can take out parts and replace them with another part, and you can kind of see how they sit in the overall project. And you know, that was one thing that I really had problems with when I was starting out, was building all the different pieces together and making them sound good together. It never worked. It was so hard. And so with this, you've got that whole project, and so if you're just kind of substituting your own kick drum line for the kick drum line that's in the project, you can kind of see how it fits with everything, okay? So like I say, this is going to be a little bit of an advanced project if you haven't done a lot of music production yet. And I think it's important to remember that this is a learning experience. You're going to learn a lot of stuff in this. And in fact, when Fran and I were working together on this project, we learned a lot from each other, even though we've both been doing this for years and years. So if you get to points in this where you think this is way over my head, don't worry. Like, hopefully you're still going to learn from it. Now, to give you a bit more background about the project itself, what we decided to do for this one, it's a progressive house track. Okay, it's about roughly 6 minutes long, I think. We did the original in Ableton Live, and the drawback with this is that to use this project file, we're using Ableton 9.5, and you can't open a 9.5 file in an earlier version of Ableton. So if you've got 9.5, you're set. You're going to be able to open this. If you've got 9, you're kind of set, because anyone who has 9 has a free upgrade to 9.5, so you can upgrade, you'll be able to work with this. If you've got an older version of Ableton, you're going to have problems. But we've been thinking about that. And so we're kind of this is the first part in this. We're at the start of this overall project. We started putting the track together a couple days ago. So we've got the track ready, but trying to tie in all the different projects and trying to figure out how we're going to present it in different DAWs and whatnot, that's the stuff we're kind of working as we go. So our intent, right now, it's in Ableton. We're also going to do versions in a couple of other DAWs, and we're not 100% sure what that will be yet. My initial guess is Pro Tools, absolutely for sure. Cubase, good chance of me doing a project in Cubase because I learned using Cubase. Possibly Sonar, that's another one I learned on early. FL Studio, I know that's a popular one and a lot of people would prefer to see a version of the project in FL Studio. I don't actually use that, but I'm pretty sure I can figure it out. Reaper is another option. Like I say, I don't know which ones of these will be ready and how soon they'll be ready after this video goes online, but the way that we've got this set up is we're going to put all the project files on Dropbox, and so we'll have a notice on my video page, something like that, as different DAW versions come up. And so basically my ultimate intent is hopefully within a month you'll be able to download the one single zipped file, and it'll contain all the audio parts, all the samples, everything you need, not just for the Ableton version, but it'll also contain Cubase version, Pro Tools version, stuff like that. Now, I'm kind of under a time deadline here, so I don't know how complex each of these are going to be. It may be that with the other versions, like the Pro Tools and stuff like that, I may not be able to rebuild the project from scratch using MIDI in every single editor. It may be that I do what's called exporting stems from Ableton, and I just make simple things. And so a stem, basically, like let's say that we've built a kick drum using MIDI notes and samples and stuff like that, and that's what's making the noise in the Ableton project. And there's probably effects on it too. What I can do is I can temporarily turn off the effects, things like reverb, things like chorus. I probably wouldn't have chorus on a kick drum, but reverb, chorus, EQs, compression, stuff like that. We could temporarily turn off all those effects. We'd have the bare bones sound of the kick drum for the whole instrument, and we can export the kick drum as one long audio file, the length of the song. We do that with all the different instruments, and we make notes on all the different effects that we had on each of those instruments, and we'll document all this. And then I may take all those audio tracks called stems and put them into other editors like Pro Tools, like Reaper, FL Studio, and then put the in-house effects from those things, from Pro Tools, whatever, and kind of emulate what we've done with the Ableton project file. So hopefully eventually about 90% of you will be able to, if you're using some audio editor, we'll hit all the big ones, and hopefully that's how it's all going to work. Like I say, Dropbox is going to be where it's stored. I will put a link on the screen right now to the Dropbox files you can download. And of course, all the links that I'm going to talk about throughout this video, they're going to also be in the description underneath the video. Now, very important for you to know that YouTube, at the time of filming, does not allow annotations to show up on mobile devices. And quite often when I say I'm going to put a link on the screen, well, that's an annotation. And so you may not see that if you're on a mobile device. Don't worry, I'm not losing my mind. It's really there, you just can't see it. So go into that description underneath the video. You'll find references to everything that we're going to share with you. Okay, so it's going to be a big file, a big folder. Like right now it's already 1 gigabyte. And if we turn everything into stems and add all the different project files, eventually it's probably going to be a 2 gigabyte zip file that you're going to have to download to get access to all this stuff. I should point out that some of you that really get into this project may want to come back and refer to these videos several times over and over. So just to note, this first video in the series is a very general overview, and so we will get into talking about the way the project's laid out as a whole. But there's a lot of general information in this one, and it's the second and third video, or second, third, fourth, if we need that many, that will really get into the fine details of each specific section within the tracks, like the drums, the bass, etc. So we'll make sure that we put a like a clickable index down in the video description or something like that. So, you know, say you decide to look at this project again 3 or 4 weeks from now, after you've already watched all the videos, and you want to come back and learn more about the drums again. So you'll be able to go directly to that spot in the appropriate video with that index, because I think a lot of you will only need to watch this first general video one time, and the other videos that have the specific info you may refer to quite a few times over the course of a few weeks or whatever. Okay? So at this point, I think it's pretty important that I introduce to you my partner in crime, Fran Cormier. So Fran and I met probably a decade ago, both DJing. We both lived in the Atlantic side of Canada, and so he was DJing a lot of scratching and stuff like that, whereas I was more into the rave scene, the trance, progressive house, techno, that sort of stuff. Anyway, we got to know each other back then, and at one point I actually did a video based on one of his performances, which you really should check out. I'll put a link here on the screen. Anyway, so maybe I'll turn things over to Fran for a couple of minutes here, and he can give you some he can introduce himself, give you a little bit of background on how he got into wanting to learn about production of this kind of music, and maybe give you some background too on where he did his learning, how he learned. Fran?
Okay, yeah. I started listening back into more modern dance music about 3.5 years ago, and was listening to a lot of Hardwell sets and Above and Beyond. And then I started trying to learn how to use, the first things I started trying to learn how to use was Native Instruments Massive and Battery. So I just started doing tutorials online on YouTube, and I used Mac Pro Video, and I spent a couple months working on that, and I just wanted to learn faster. I wanted to learn faster and faster, and I thought, well, how am I going to learn at the level that I want? And then I went online and looked at some courses or schools, actually, online electronic dance music schools. And Dubspot was a North American version, and I think you took courses from...
I went to Berkeley, yeah.
Berkeley, but wasn't there... There's a program in England...
Point blank.
Point blank.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was looking at both of those, and I decided to start taking courses at Dubspot. And the first course I took there was just a music foundations course, and that taught us basic rhythms and beat, and taught us chord progressions, and taught us how to deconstruct dance music and see the formula and then try to create our own tracks based on that. So I did 3 months of foundation, and then I wanted to keep learning more. So then the next course I took was production using Ableton. I used Ableton in the music foundations course, but didn't really understand how to use it that well. And then I took a 6-month course through Dubspot teaching me how to use Ableton and produce my own electronic dance music. And then after that, I wanted to learn how to produce my own sound. So then I took another course from Dubspot it was Sound Design Using Native Instruments Complete. And that was a year course online. And so that was it took me about 2 years to do all those courses. And then, so that was about a year ago when I finished at Dubspot, almost exactly a year ago. And then in the last year, I've been just working on my own and trying to develop my skills. And in the last year, I've done probably about 80 to 85 tracks. And I do have an album now called My Heart, which consists of 10 of those 85 tracks. And really, those 10 tracks are sounding pretty good, but it took me, even in that year, just to developing the tracks, it took to get those 10 good tracks, it took 85 tracks.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, as far as something else I want to talk about too is with this stuff, like I say, we're going to give you our project files, the whole thing, and so you can make remixes. Now, I want you, if you want to learn more about Fran, there's going to be a bunch of links down in the bottom of the YouTube description. If there's any professional producers out there that are interested in collaborating with him after we've gone through this project, you can kind of see what skill levels we're at right now. If you're interested in doing a collaboration, we'll put his email address down there so that you can get in touch with him. He's probably going to be interested in working with a few people. Not a ton of people, obviously, because there's time constraints on everything. Now, one thing I want to clarify, with what we're going to share with you, all of this is going to be basically, I'm not going to say copyright free. I guess we're going to probably put a copyright on the song. But even though it's going to be copyrighted, we're going to say you have permission to remix this track and to share it on your own websites, on your own Facebook pages, your own SoundCloud accounts, stuff like that. We just do have one request. You know, we're putting a lot of time and effort into this project, and we're trying to help all you guys out. We would appreciate it if you can help us out too. And so the best way to help us out is if you do a remix and share it, make sure that it still has our name on it also. So, you know, if the convention for naming a remix is usually the artist name and then the track title, and then in brackets you have the remixer's name. So you can put this down as DJ Bolivia and Francis Cormier. You can put it down by our stage names, Bolivia and Urban Francis. And then the title of the track, I guess we're going to call it Courage.
Yeah.
We think. We've only decided this in the last few minutes. So you'll call it something like Bolivia and Urban Francis, Courage, XX Remix. So whatever your name is, John Smith's Remix. Yeah, so if you can do it that way, we'd really appreciate that. Above and beyond that, if you do that and then you want to go on and start making some other tracks of your own, and you're using a lot of elements of this project file for the basis for your own new tracks, we're cool with that. Go ahead and do it. But yeah, it'd be nice if you did a remix of ours also, just to help spread the love.
But I think, yeah, if they like an element and they want to use that in their own track, that's awesome. Like, the kick we have is really fat, so if they want to use that kick in another track,
yeah,
for sure.
For sure.
I think.
So I think the general way that we're going to deal with this, obviously these are not going to be short videos, and this is a pretty complex project, to be honest, for a first project. Now, if you want to learn more about this, if you've already learned some production, I think you're going to love this. If you're just getting into it, some of it's going to be over your head. And to be honest, even before I eventually get into that long series about production from the basics right on up, that huge, massive project, I'll probably do one more of these projects where I do something a little bit more simple, where I do something like a very loop-based project, where I just say, okay, here we've got 6 or 8 different loops, a simple set of drum loops, we've got a bass loop, we've got a couple keyboards, stuff like that, and we'll build a very simple host track or something like that to kind of get you into a more easy introduction into it. But you know, there's going to be people watching this with all different skill levels when it comes to production. There's going to be people, I know there's going to be a lot of you out there that have never ever, you know, touched the thought of producing a track, but you're curious about it. And there's also going to be people that have been starting to learn. There's going to be people that are going to school for this professionally. There's going to be producers out there who have got thousands, hundreds of thousands of fans that are just curious about how does another producer do it. So hopefully we can appeal to all those different skill levels. One more thing with these videos, with this one in particular, which is about Ableton Live, if you are trying to learn how to do this stuff and you don't know how to use Ableton yet, we're not going to teach you how to use Ableton in these videos. There's thousands of videos out there that can do that. I've got some. Go to djbolivia.ca/videos. If you've never used Ableton before, but you think it's time to start learning, I'll give you a hint. A couple easy ones to get you into the whole use of Ableton. I've got 3 videos that I made a few years ago which were talking about how to make a studio-based DJ mix, like a radio show or something. And in those 3 videos, they're long, like this series, you know, they're not short, they're about an hour each, all 3 of them. But in those videos, I kind of assumed that people didn't really know how to use Ableton at all, so I did a lot of training in those 3. And so you may not want to learn how to put together a DJ mix in Ableton, but I think that those 3 would be good videos to give you a ton of background, which is very relevant to what we're going to learn with this series. Okay? So anyway, the rest of this video, what we're going to try and cover is the overview of how the project is laid out. We'll talk about things like the send returns. We'll give a quick overview showing all the different tracks that we have. We'll talk about how we're grouping tracks. That's about it. That's going to take a little while. Okay, the next video, part 2, is probably, I'm guessing, going to talk about the kick, all the drum tracks, and hopefully also the bass tracks in the same video. We'll see how long it takes to go through all the drum tracks. Okay, and then probably a third video where we talk about all the other stuff, which would be keyboards, guitars, pads, pianos, vocals, effects, white noise, stuff like that. Okay? Now, I think something I probably should have started at the beginning of this video. I should let you hear the song before we get into this, okay? So right now, the version that we are going to talk about today is a vocal mix. And, you know, some people really like to hear vocals in their songs. This one does not have a whole lot of vocals. You know, it's progressive house, but I'm very techno-ish based. So the amount of vocals in this is pretty limited. It's a few samples that we've manipulated, stuff like that. I'll probably put this version online. I may also put a separate video for an instrumental mix of this online at some point in the next few weeks. Okay, so I'll put a link at the bottom of the screen right now to either this vocal mix or to 2 separate different videos. You can check out the song before we go any further into explaining how this whole project went together. Okay, so if you want to check that out now, go ahead, and then in a few seconds we're going to get into talking about the overall structure of how the project file was put together. First of all, PC or Mac? Well, both works. Fran uses a Mac, I use a PC, and because Ableton can deal with both, we were sharing the files, the project back and forth through Dropbox, and we were both able to work on it. So it doesn't matter what you're using, either one will work. Number 2, Ableton. Obviously we're using Ableton, and I mentioned earlier that you have to have Ableton 9.5. Earlier versions of Ableton will not open a file that was produced or last saved from Ableton 9.5. Going forward in the future, if we get to Ableton 10 or 11, people using those can go back and open this Ableton 5 project file. Nothing I can do about that. And also the other thing is with Ableton, there's 3 different levels of complexity. So there's a light version, a standard version, and a suite version. And the difference is the suite version is the most complex, and it includes a lot of audio effects and effects racks that are not necessarily included within the standard, and almost definitely not included within the light version of Ableton. And unfortunately, because of the complexity of this project, we had to use the suite version. We had to have access to a lot of those plugins. Okay, so if you try to load this project on a standard or a light, there's going to be stuff missing, and I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do about that. Not easily. Actually, there is one thing. You could use the stems that we produce eventually, but we'll talk about that later. So anyway, as far as plugins go, that's another interesting topic. We originally set this up with a whole lot of different plugins. You know, we were using Ozone 5, Ozone 7, using Waves plugins, quite a few different things. And then we realized all of a sudden, wait a sec, this is a bad idea because you guys won't be able to use it because a lot of you don't have those same plugins. So what we did was we cut out plugins where we could and replaced them with stock Ableton plugins from the suite version. In some cases, we cannot replace them with something easily in suite. So what we did instead was we ran the MIDI through the effect or through the instrument that we liked, and we recorded the audio. Basically, we froze and flattened the audio. And so if you do that, you don't need that plugin anymore because you've got an audio file instead of all the programming that creates the sound. So that's what's happened in some cases here. So as we go through the project, we're going to see some places where a track is MIDI, and then some places where it's audio, and the ones that are audio are based on one of two things. They're either a flattened track that originally came from MIDI, or they're audio that was recorded directly, such as the vocals. So anyway, after we went through and tidied up the project that way, we got to a point where there was one plugin we couldn't replace in Ableton and we couldn't deal without. So unfortunately, there is one plugin you're going to need to make this work and sound like ours. The plugin is called the Sausage Fattener, and it's from DataLife. Got a software company to put together this plugin. And I should clarify that this is not a paid product announcement. I've never DJ'd with DataLife, never done any production work, whatever. But this is a great plugin. And so basically what it is, it's a kind of compression, coloring, mastering plugin to fatten up the sound. And as we go through the project, you will see that we've used it quite a few times. And so in a number of cases, it's on individual tracks. And there's also one on the master track, which in the end kind of glues the whole mix together and makes it sound a little bit more cohesive as a whole. So the good thing is this plugin, you can download it. It's only $29 US. So compared to a lot of software, that's a pretty good price. But yeah, you need it. And it's worth it. This is one of the most cost-effective, most bang for the buck plugins there is out there. So definitely look into it and get that loaded up before we get into looking at the project. It'll be helpful for you to understand the mindset that I have when I approach certain aspects of production. Okay, it's kind of some of my mantra, my way of doing things for a few things. Okay, so let's first talk about space in the mix. And a good mantra to go with is less is more. A lot of producers, when they're starting out, I was the same way, and sometimes still do it, is you put too much in the track. Because when you start out with a bare bones track, often it starts sounding better as you add extra elements, extra instruments to the mix. But there comes a time when you've added enough, and adding any more stuff tends to make it sound worse. So you've got to learn to recognize this point. And it's basically because within a mix, you need space for all the different things. By space, there's two ways that stuff gets spread out in a mix. Well, two main ways. The first is stereo placement, panning in the stereo field. And so an instrument can be in the center, it can be on the left or right. Think about it this way. If you're in a room with a small band that's performing, they're not going through a sound system, they're just right in front of you. And you've got four different people, a little drummer, hand drummer, you've got a guitarist, acoustic guitarist, you've got a piano player, and you've got a vocalist. If the four of them are playing together, you are going to hear them, your ears are going to perceive them coming at you from different directions. And it's cool, because it sounds, it sounds good. Your brain kind of separates the different sources of sound a little bit better than if all four of them were standing in a clump and they were further away from you and it sounded like the sound is all coming from the same place. So stereo panning within a mix emulates this and spreads things out so your guitar doesn't overlap as much with your vocalist, etc. The other way to separate the instruments so each one stands out a little bit more is through placement within the frequency spectrum. So let's take three common instruments that kind of share the same frequency range. A piano, an acoustic guitar, and a singer. And so maybe those three instruments, a lot of their output comes in the frequency range between, say, 1,000 hertz and 6,000 or 8,000 hertz. Okay, if all three are playing at the same time, they're going to muddy each other up and they're going to interfere with each other. So a solution is to isolate each of them in terms of frequency. And so what you can do is, rather than boosting frequencies, you take away stuff. And so with the vocalist, maybe you think his or her best part of their sound is from 2 to 3,000 hertz. And maybe the piano, you like the stuff around, say, 7,000 to 9,000 hertz. And the guitar, maybe you like the stuff at 3 to 4. So for each of those instruments, instead of boosting the part you like, what you do is you leave those parts alone, but the parts that you're not using, you get rid of them as much as possible. Filter them out, flatten them. And if you do that, then what remains is kind of more unique, because it's not overlapping. It's not causing the frequency interference, basically, and messing up the sound. Okay, so you'll see some, as we get into the track details, you'll see us talking in more detail about that stuff, and you'll see us EQing stuff out. Gain staging is important, and that refers to your volume control. Now, a lot of people, when they go into production, they'll start everything out at a fairly decent volume so you can hear it well, and then at some point in the mixing process, production process, they're like, I can't hear this guitar very well, I'll turn it up. And then after they turn up the guitar, a few minutes later, they're like, that guitar, I can't really hear my piano. I better turn the piano up. And so it's like a vicious cycle, and you keep turning stuff up and up, trying to make everything stand out. And everything is coming up to the maximum possible volume. Pretty soon, you're going over 0 decibels, you're distorting, it's a disaster, okay? So from the start, realize you've got to have all your individual sounds pretty low in the mix. You know, minus 12, no problem. It's cool because once you have a whole bunch of stuff that's all at minus 12, those sounds accumulate, group together, and they become louder. Okay? It's always easier to, once you've got a final mix, say your final master track output is too low because you've started out everything too low. Say the master is only at minus 6. That's a great thing. It's really easy to bring that level up during the mastering process. You can't bring it down once it's too high, okay? So keep that in mind as we build a project, as you build your projects. Very important, once in a while, step back and walk away, because you'll find, you start fiddling with stuff and you're frustrated because it doesn't sound great, and things are overlapping, whatever. It's not working. And that happens to all of us all the time. And the best option really is just close the computer. Do something else. Go read a book, go for a walk, whatever. Come back to it an hour later, come back to it 2 days later, and you'll have a fresh approach, and often things work a lot better once you do that. Another thing is, you'll find that a project is never done. You're never happy with the project. You could always think, well, I can do some more stuff. I've been as guilty of that as everyone, probably more guilty of that, because so many projects I've thought about it and I've thought, okay, this is going to be ready in an hour. And then an hour later I think, no, I want to work on this some more. I could work on it for 3 more weeks and I'm not going to be much more happy. So all producers out there, as you're learning, you've got to learn. You have to learn that there comes a time when you just have to say, this track is finished. It may not officially be finished, but you have to make that decision to say, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like, I'm sure I could make it sound a little bit better with another 80 hours of work, but is it really worth it? Why don't you spend that 80 hours and build a second track? Okay? So we got to this point this afternoon, and we thought we could play with this for a few more days, but everything's a work in progress. So we just said, let's do it. Let's do the videos, whatever. And so as we're going through this, there's going to be a few times where we are actually fixing things as we explain what we've done. And so the version of the project that you see right now is not going to be the version on Dropbox per se, because I'm sure we're going to change a few things in the next few hours. So once we're done these videos in a few hours, that version is going to be the one that's on Dropbox for all of you to download. Okay, so I'm going to let Fran do the detailed breakdown of the tracks, but I'll talk a little bit here about the general overview too. And so right now you can see that we're in arrangement view, and this whole big rectangle of stuff is our song. And so all these different colors represent clips that are being used within the song. Now if you look up along this top line, you can see intro, break, part A, blah blah blah. And so basically those are just labels to indicate what each section is. So all this stuff vertically underneath the intro is the first 32 bars of the intro section. And then next we get into a 16 bar long break. And you can see there's not as much happening within this little chunk, this column. And that's because the break is a little bit quieter. Now next we get into part A, two 16 bar sections back to back. And there's quite a lot of color here. And that's because there's quite a lot of instruments playing simultaneously. So it's kind of a more complex part. Then we get to another break, and fairly empty, not a lot going on. And in fact, when this was an instrumental version, it was a very subtle, quiet section of the song. Now this stuff down here is mostly some vocals that we added, some samples and stuff like that. And so we'll play that later on. Then you get to part C, and we have 4 separate 16 bar sections all back to back. And this is really the highest energy level of the song. And you can see as we went from 16 bar section to 16 bar section, we tried to make some changes. And you basically try to build the energy as you go through. So first section, it had this blue clip. Second section, the blue was still there, but we added this purple clip, which was some guitar. The whole time, the bass and the drums and stuff are going. Then into the third section, for consistency, the guitar kept playing through, but we cut out this blue stuff and then we added some other stuff, some piano stabs. And then finally, the last part of that energetic section, we brought all 4 of them together, and plus other elements. And then once that was done, we get into our outro section, and you can kind of see as time goes on, stuff starts dropping out, it gets quieter and quieter as you go towards the end of the song. And then that's the end. So that's kind of the grand overview of what our track looks like. Next, let's look over on the right side of the screen here, and you can see that we have all of the names for our different tracks, or channels, whatever you want to call them. Now, each of these has a little arrow to the side of it, and you can expand them. Some of them, when you expand them, turn into a single track. So the reference is a single track. Now, there's nothing in this one at the moment. I'll explain that in a minute. The next one, the side chain, if you open that, it's a single track. And this is a ghost side chain, which Fran will talk about more later. But you can see there is stuff in it. Now, when you get to the third thing, the kick, this one's a little bit different. All these things open up. And because what this is, if you look at this backwards upside down letter L format, it's because the kick thing here is actually a group folder. And so within that, you see that the track itself looks like there's really not much in it. There's just this lightly shaded stuff. And that represents actual audio files in different tracks within this folder, within this group. And so the punch track is all this stuff here. So that's part of the kick group. And this sub is a track that's part of this kick group. So basically we have 2 tracks that are grouped together, and we call the group the kick. And to try and make this a little more obvious for you, I've made sure that all the groups have capital letters and all the individual tracks within the group have lowercase. Okay, let's keep going down and see what else. Drums, the drum grouping, we have 3 individual tracks. Snare, 1, 2, and epic snare. Within the hi-hats is a group, and within that we have 3 separate hi-hats tracks. And you can see not all of them play at the same time. Sometimes just one's playing, sometimes we've got different bits and pieces from jumping back and forth, sometimes stuff playing simultaneously. Within the bass, this is a big one. So this bass group actually has 6 separate tracks. Not all of them are being used at the time. Some of these we probably could have taken out. And in fact, when we go through this in more detail in a few minutes, we may take some of this stuff out. So it may not be in your version that you've downloaded from Dropbox. We have a second bass group, And I can't even remember why we have a second bass group instead of putting them all together, but doesn't matter. Anyway, this one has 2 individual tracks within it. And then moving down further, piano stabs, 2 tracks of piano stuff within the stabs, within the piano folder group. Guitar, we have 2 individual tracks within the guitar group. Let's make that a better size. Chords, melody, we have 4 different, 4 different individuals within the group. Pads, we only have 1. And so really the pads did not have to have a grouping because it's by itself. So instead of having this grouping designation, we could have just had a single pad track. And I'm not sure really why we set it up this way. I think
one of the good things is it gives you 2 places to change the volume, so it does give you more control. Because we have automation on one of the pads, and then we can do the overall volume on the grouping.
Yeah, this is a good time to talk about that. Let's say that you have a group with, let's go back up to our bass, and we have all these different basses playing. Now, if you want to make a volume change on all the bass stuff throughout the track, if you go to change, let's say you have these 6 tracks, you have to change the volume on all 6 normally. It's a lot of work. Instead, you can just change it on the group volume, and they all change together as a group. That's kind of the short, simple version. Going back to pads, another reason why we may have had this is because maybe we had 2 pad tracks at one point and then just decided we weren't using one and got rid of it.
It's possible.
Yeah. Vocals, within the vocals we have 3 tracks, and to be honest, one of these is not even being used. You can see the yellow's not on. Yellow means the track is active. So I think that's just a backup for the for something else we had earlier. And we could probably get rid of that at some point. We can get rid of it now, probably, can't we? Cut. Okay, simple. And then finally, effects. We have 6 different effects within the effects grouping. And of course, down here is the master track, and that one's treated a little bit differently than the other tracks, but we'll go into that more. So like I say, capital letters for groupings, or for a single important track by itself. Other than that, if you're not used to Ableton, here's our solo buttons. So basically turning the yellow off is kind of like a mute, and turning a single blue on solos that track. If you hold down Control or Command, you can actually solo multiple tracks at once. So we'll do that at some points. And looking down here, if you're on a specific track, so let's go into one of the hi-hats tracks. We'll go into 19 hi-hats. And if you press your tab key, normally it goes back and forth between session and arrangement view. But if you hold down your shift key on a PC, I'm not sure what it is on the Mac, and you press that tab, you flip back and forth between your effects and clip view, waveform envelope view, or MIDI clip view. So let me highlight a clip in here. And so you can kind of see all this stuff, and I'm right now pressing Shift Tab to go back and forth between the view of the clip and between the effects on that channel. Okay, so we'll be examining both of those in a little bit more depth as we go through this channel by channel. Okay, so I think at this point you have a pretty good idea of the general scope of the project, a general overview of what it's going to look like here. And so we're about to get into a detailed breakdown track by track in these next couple of videos. So I will point out that there's places in this video where you'll see some clips that are blanked out. And that's basically because sometimes when you're building a track, you put too much stuff in, and like I said earlier, less is more. So sometimes you start cutting stuff out to make it sound better. But if you cut something and just delete it, what happens if you want it back? So you'll see places where we've got stuff that's grayed out, so it's still available, we can bring it back in. Anyway, as you get into the next video, we're going to be talking in some detail about the different effects chains and effects that we've got on the different tracks. And we're going to be talking about how we set up the MIDI parts or how we set up the audio parts. And some of these are, some of these started out as MIDI, and we had different plugins, instruments, stuff like that, VSTIs, whatever, that we know that you don't have. And so we thought, well, you can't use them. So the solution is in Ableton is freezing and flattening them. So it takes the output of the MIDI being run through an instrument, turns it into audio, and then the audio everyone can share. So we've got some audio that came about that way, and then other audio that came because it was just record, like the vocals were just a straight audio recording. Anyway, yeah, so let's end this video right here. You've got a good general overview, and the next video we're going to be very specific, and it would really help you if you had the whole project file set up on your own machine to look at with us as we go through. There's going to be a lot of times in these next couple of videos, because we're getting into such specific detail, that you're probably going to want to pause the YouTube video and you're going to want to play with this, study the effects, try and really wrap your head around how we've got this set up, because this is a pretty complex project. It's a full project. Anyway, thanks for tuning in so far, and let's move on to the next video.